Hi there, I'm Steve Hackett and you're watching Morow.com. Well, I couldn't live off my royalties at the moment because my royalties are in dispute. I'm in court over my royalties. So I have a big court battle with all of that stuff. Even though I'm on 50% of all the Genesis stuff, you know, and all my solo stuff, you know, 50 odd albums worth. But no, I can't afford to retire, not at the moment. Maybe in a month's time I might be able to afford to retire after the court case, we'll see. But I won't retire anyway. I like to work. Music is what defines me and galvanizes me and drives me to get up at unearthly hours in the morning. I was up at 5:30 today. You know, that's not unusual for me because we're traveling so much, different places. So before I was in the music business, my sleep used to be much more regular. You know, with life of a musician, especially doing all these shows, I find I do it because I love it, not because it's physically beneficial, but it's beneficial spiritually. It's something I feel I must do. It's always a privilege and an honor to be able to do this. I remember what it was like in the days before I had a life in the music business. I did 5 years of the most soul-destroying, very boring jobs. So for me, to be able to do music is still an absolute joy. What galvanizes me is to be able to surprise myself. There are some times when I surprise myself, and those are the moments that I live for. Well, I grew up in London, England, in the 1950s, before there was such a thing as rock and roll, but there was already blues. Already Muddy Waters was making a sound that sounded very much like rock and roll was going to become. But in those days I grew up listening to Mario Lanza on the radio, Frank Sinatra, all these singers, sometimes classical music. They were very fond in England of playing Gluck's, Orpheus and Eurydice. And it was normally a female singer singing the part of Orpheus himself. A woman called Kathleen Ferrier, who had a very lovely voice. And then after Mario Lanza and all these singers, suddenly Elvis was on the scene in about 1955, and everything seemed to change. Everything got shook up. Bill Haley and the Comets, of course, and suddenly, you know, almost as if bebop turned into rock overnight. And so my influences were listening to a mixture of classical music and all sorts of stuff. You know, in those days, on the radio in England, you would hear German music, Schlager, anything but rock and roll. But I came to love the work of Bach, and I came to love blues and the work of Tchaikovsky, as much as I enjoyed the work of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and latterly I discovered the work of Howlin' Wolf, Muddy Waters I've mentioned, Little Walter, guys that were harmonica players as much as singers. So I was playing harmonica when I was a child from the age of about 3 or 4. My mother says I was playing at the age of 2, but I think that's creative license. I was trying to play at that age. My father played, and my grandfather played. Everyone seemed to play harmonica at home, so that was my original influence. And then 10 years down the line, by the time I was about 12, 13, 14, I started to become interested in guitar. When I was 14, I was learning my first chords. Before that, I was trying to play melodies on 2 strings like bass player stuff. I was thinking of Tony Meehan and Jet Harris, who sounded a little bit like the Shadows and the Ventures. So all these bands and all these composers had their influence on me. I was influenced by everything, and I still am influenced by everything I hear. Well, it's funny. Yehudi Menuhin made a film, and he used a piece of music that I wrote. So it would be amazing if I was to look back and think I'd in any way remotely influenced that great man with his wonderful work, and when he had a choice of all the classical musicians from the past to choose from. But the people who've omitted the influence are Brian May and Alex Lifeson, I think, of Rush. Plus I came up with the tapping technique, and so the influence is acknowledged by anyone who does that. I was doing that in 1971, and if anyone has recorded tapping before that, I'd be very interested. But I seem to be the inventor of the technique. Well, I think it's a double-edged sword, because I think that if people only want to listen to the early stuff, then I will have failed in the past 30 years. But it's a bit like shadow boxing, you know, you can't leave your past behind. It will always move with you, whatever you do. So Genesis is part of what I did, and I like to think there was so much more. Genesis was great, but I've worked with lots of great musicians, great band lineups. So I'm very proud of the stuff I've done since. I was very proud of recording an album that had six pieces of Bach on it, for instance, a tribute album with nylon guitar. I suppose it's the same for anyone who becomes well known for doing anything at all. You know, there's always one thing that's more famous than anything else, and everyone always wants. Yes, I think so. I think that a lot of personal problems surfaced in the creation of that record. I didn't feel I could use my studio without interruption and without contest going on. And I always think that autonomy in the workplace is sacrosanct. You must have your space to be able to work. So I recorded my album in the living room at home, on a very small setup, with Roger King, who is a brilliant engineer and keyboard player and musician, and brilliant all-rounder. So we made a point of creating a lot of different songs in different styles. We used a pan-genre approach, many different things, from progressive to flamenco to Latin, to the influence of Turkish music, world music, jazz, fusion, blues. All these things are involved in Out of the Tunnel's Mouth, and there is a special edition which I think caters more for the nostalgic market in terms of old things played anew, as part of the jewel case edition of the album.